and I hear the first officer call out. And then the first officer jumps on the radio and he screams, "Holy shit, it's the goat man." And I mean, it's just like everything went quiet. And I could hear the ringing in my ears, and I could feel my heart race. And so I hit my light and I went flying up there.
I've been told by some older people, elders, that you grab them and you hold them and you don't own them, but you hold them there until daylight. If you can hold them or pull them into the light, it destroys anything they have, any kind of power or anything they were trying to do to you. It'll destroy them.
This guy was like bouncing, like, you know, like how you see people kind of getting ready to jig, you know how they kind of bounce? Yeah, he was like that way. He was just kind of bouncing, and he was just kind of going back and forth from one foot to the other. And he just kind of turned sideways, and he turned back over to the other way, and he took off. Holy shit, he jumped in Wanda.
This is Lodge Tales. I'm your host, Rod Williamson, and thanks again for joining us on another episode. If you are Native American and you'd like to come on the show to share your strange and paranormal experiences, please consider emailing us at lodgetales@gmail.com. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Thanks for being with us. Mike Connelly comes back again, and he's going to tell some stories about the jailhouse, boarding school, and the spirit that followed him around for, a long part of his life. Then next week, I'll get to that later, but, Indian Days is coming up. If any of you all are around, and, if I get messages or whatever, you can drop me a couple lines on that Facebook group even. If there's enough interest, I'd like to sit around camp and tell stories and, maybe even record some people's stories and stuff. So just let me know. Get in contact with me and drop some lines on that Facebook or wherever. But anyways, that'd be fun, do something like that. Well, let's just get right into the show. Here's Mike. Alright, welcome back to Lodge Tales, everyone. We got Mike back again, and he's going to talk about the jailhouse and all the stuff that goes on around there. Alright, Mike.
Hey, good evening. So I guess I just have a few short stories with jail. They ain't too long. They didn't happen too much, I guess. I don't really know where to start, though. I guess I'll start with one where when I used to work for BIA Corrections, we used to do cleaning details for the prisoners who wanted to earn extra time to get out. 2-for-1, shit like that. Mm-hmm. And so we'd make them clean, because if anybody's ever been in a Browning jail, they know that it stinks. It's horrible, disgusting. So we used to take the prisoners, and they could scrub the jail and for time off their sentence. So this one year, there was about 3 or 4 of us corrections officers on, and we had them scraping off the back cell block on the female side. We was doing the floors, gonna repaint them. And it was an all-day job, and we were sitting there, and the inmates were scrubbing and sanding the paint off and scraping it off the cement, and we just kind of walked back and checked on them. And we had a whole herd back there. I think the whole jail was doing it. Mm-hmm. And end of the day come, and we was all sitting in the detention office. It was time to add up everybody's time, and sign it, and so they could get credit through the courts. And so we were sitting there, and the other detention officer, she was signing time, and we had a line of inmates. I was sitting there watching the cameras, and the other guy was putting the inmates back in their cells. And so I looked up at the cameras, and there was still a woman sitting there, and she was really scraping away. And I said, Bobby, who's that? And she turned around and looked, and she stared at it for a little bit, and then she yelled, Rose! Well, we'll call her Rose. And the person in the camera just kept scraping. And she's like, Rose, get up here. And lady didn't pick her head up or nothing. She just sat there. And finally, well, Rose was really hard of hearing. And so finally Bobby yelled. She was like, Rose, get up here. And Rose stepped around from behind another inmate, and she's like, I'm right here. And we both looked at each other, and we looked at the camera, and all those inmates seen that camera, and they was like, oh, shit. And then they all started screaming and scattering because it wasn't Rose, and they was all accounted for. So we went creeping back there, and by the time we got around that back side, it just kind of gone.
Damn.
So there's one.
Was her back turned to the camera? Could you see her face or anything?
No, you couldn't see her face. She was down on her hands and knees with a scraper, and her hair was drenched over, like when a woman's kneeling down scraping, and the hair's not put back. It's hanging down over her sides of her face, so you couldn't really see. But Bobby said it looked just like Rose.
Oh.
And so that's why she started yelling her name.
Uh-huh.
But there's been a few instances that female side was that we never really used the back cells on there for any females, just because all the female inmates would say that there was a woman that roamed those cells, or they'd hear somebody screaming, or stuff like that. So one night we had this younger lady. She come in. She was pretty intoxicated, and so we have that restraint chair that BIA used. Mm-hmm. For anybody that was combative. This younger female was very combative. And so we get her put in that chair, and we wheel her back in that back cell, and we close it up and we lock it, and she's going crazy, just yelling and screaming, and she probably goes on for about a good 30, 45 minutes, and then she finally stops. And we got the camera on her, so her back's facing the camera, and in front of her is right in front of the cell door. And you can kind of see partial sides of the bunk beds there. Mm-hmm. And so once it calmed down and she stopped screaming, I started checking the cameras. Well, we did our cell check, and then we come back and we checked our cameras. And she was sitting there, and she was all peaceful. She was quiet, and she was looking to the right of her towards the beds. And when I looked, I had to get close to the camera, but you could see these legs swinging. Like when somebody's sitting on a bed and they can't touch the floor. Yeah. And their legs were just swinging back and forth. The thing is she was the only one in that cell.
Jeez.
And she was still in there. She was looking over like she was talking to somebody. And about that time, we just heard screaming coming from that cell. And I was like, holy shit. And we jumped up and we run back there. And I opened up that cell door, and she was in tears, and she was begging to be let out of there. And so we got her out. She said she'd behave. And I asked her, I said, what happened? And she said, there's a little girl sitting in that cell with me. She just swinging her legs, telling me she was going to stab me and cut my hair.
Oh. God damn.
So years ago, that backside there, they used to use that as a juvenile detention, and it was just one side, and that was before the white buffalo, so they could have someplace to hold them.
Yeah.
And so they I don't know if they've ever had anything happen in there, but they obviously they must have had something bad happen in there. But you know, in the nights you'd have to walk all the way around that to do your checks and stuff, and nobody ever wanted to walk back in that back part. And so one night I was like, I'll walk it. And so I go through the female side, I check on a female, I go through that back door, and we always kept it closed. We always kept that back cell block just sealed off, and it was just because if we did it, that door would slam all night and nobody'd be back there. And so I went through, and we still got to check it. So I went through and I closed it, and I checked that cell, which the door was open, and I just poked my head in there, nobody in there, obviously. And so I walked around the corner to the other door, and when I was sticking my key in that door, this blood-curdling scream just let out right behind me in my ear. And I just shook and I froze. And I couldn't move, and I was afraid to turn around and look. And I was just sitting there shaking those keys, and I could just feel breath, like somebody breathing on the back of my neck, and I didn't want to look back. And, you know, those old people say you don't look back at those because then they'll twist your face.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was sitting there, and I was trying my keys, and I was shaking so bad it probably took me about a minute to actually get that key in there and open that door. And so once you pop it, the door is spring-loaded, so it'll pop open. And I had to like push on it like something was holding it or pulling it shut. And so I had to shove my shoulder into it, and I popped through it, and I slammed it behind me, and I just felt relief after that. So I finished my round really quick, and the next time that I went back through there, I had one of those guys go with me. And I was telling him what happened, and nobody really wanted to walk it. I was like, well, there's two of us. We'll be all right.
Yeah. That always happens there, huh? Does it happen to other people too when you were working down there?
I've heard a few tell a few stories. My mom used to tell me when she was a dispatcher years ago, and they had that booking window that looked right into the dispatch center rather than being walled off. And she said that, so you carry around this big thing of keys with maybe 4 or 5 keys on it, and they jingle when you walk, you know, just like those old school movies. And my mom would tell me that she'd be sitting there and she'd hear those keys jingle by. But back then, the dispatcher was the detention officer because they were so short-staffed. And so she actually had the keys, but she said she could hear him jingling walking down that hallway. It would get right up to that window, and then it would just stop. And she'd end up calling one of the officers down, and they'd walk back there and check, and they wouldn't see nothing. But did I tell you about, I can't remember if I told that story about the jail. I think I did. It was one of those first ones with when I was looking in a trustee cell, and the guy kept,
Yeah, you told that one. That's creepy, man. Ooh. Guy was looking at you.
Yeah, that's, so a different time, and it was on Halloween. I was working one night, and I come walking down doing my cell check. This probably about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, and I just double checking all the cells, and I looked into that one cell, and the lights were flickering off and on, you know, and I looked into that cell, and there was 1 or 2 inmates in there, I can't remember, and the light was flickering like they was burning out, those fluorescent lights. And I looked and I couldn't see anybody else, and when I pulled back and I went to turn to walk away, something whispered, "Hey," right in my ear. because
Oh,
I'm running at that cell block.
geez, is there I remember you said you guys, or well, I remember when we were smaller, you lived in boarding school, but those houses down
Oh,
there, have you gotten,
oh,
was there stuff going on down there too?
holy shit. Oh, yeah. So, when I was a kid,
Mm-hmm.
well, obviously lived in boarding school, and I would I would lay in bed and I would hear it. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, and I would hear footsteps going up and down our hallway, and then I would hear dishes banging, and I kept trying to tell myself it was my mom and dad. You know,
Yeah.
one of them was up doing something, and so the next day I'd always ask, "Was you up?" And they'd like, "No, we slept all night." But it was always an occurring thing, and so I would hear these heavy footsteps walk down the hall. It would always stop at my door. It never walk past my open door, and then it'd turn around and it would go back. Well, one night my dad was telling me that my dad used to smoke, and he had bad nightmares from cop stuff and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And so he'd lay awake and he'd wake up 3, 4 in the morning. He'd lay in bed and smoke a cigarette. And so his room was, I don't know, what do you say, kitty corner to mine. So like where his bed was, he could see out his door, he could see my door and into my room.
Mm-hmm.
And one night he said he was laying there and sleeping. And he said he lit up a cigarette. He said something woke him up. He didn't know what it was. He lit up a cigarette and he was laying there and he was smoking. He said he was just looking out at my door and just laying there on the side and watching my door. And he said all of a sudden he heard footsteps coming down that hallway. And then he seen this big man, this big frame of a man walk into my bedroom. And so he jumped up. Should I just get goosebumps about this one? So he jumped up and grabbed his AR and he went running into my room. And he threw the light on and he looked all over and there was nobody in there. It was just me sleeping. So he picked me up out of my bed and went and put me in bed with him and my mom, and that's where I slept at the rest of the night.
Oh.
And that's but I mean there were demons in that place. My mom said one night she come home, she caught a ride, she was dispatching. My dad was watching us because he was off. He worked the day shift, and so she worked the night shift. She said she got off at 4 and she caught a ride from one of the officers and they brought her down. She said when they pulled up, the officer said, "Oh, your kids are up." And my mom said, that goddamn Mike, he let those kids stay up. And she said when she looked in, when the lights hit that big window, she said there was a little boy and a little girl standing there. And so she thought it was me and my sister, Jamie.
Yeah.
And so she said she went in the house on the fight. She's going to cuss my dad out because those kids are still awake. And she said she walked down there and we was both sound asleep with my dad in bed. She said she just closed the door, locked it, and crawled in bed and went to sleep.
Oh.
But there used to be a little boy and a little girl that would stand in my closet in my bedroom and they'd say, "Mike, come play with me. Come on, come in here, come play with me." And they would always try and coach me in there.
Oh, God. That sounds similar to that little boy's end. There's that little boy and that little girl that would play down by that exit sign. God,
Yeah, I think it was probably the same one.
That used to really, man, okay, so in the second grade is when I first went down to boarding school. You know, you're pretty damn young then. And
Yeah.
I was put right there in that bed that's right next to the hallway. I mean, you know, there's a big open room. You can just see down the hallway, see to the next room. There's no door like in a big boy's inn. You got a door to your room. It's just big open.
Yeah.
And I was looking down. Well, I don't know. I just was staying up late, you know, because I just couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about, you know, a lot was going on at the time. My grandma had died. My grandpa was really sad. My mom and dad were kind of, you know, I wasn't very good at home. So I was just kind of, I guess, missing my grandma or whatever. But it was keeping me up. And I was looking down that hallway. And first I seen a couple of shadows just kind of dart by. I thought, geez, I wonder who's down there. I wonder what they're playing. You know, I thought it was, because I didn't know everybody there yet. And so I laid there and I watched. Heck, nothing. It seems like as soon as I'd turn my eyes away and kind of move my head, roll over a little bit, I'd hear those pitter-patter, their feet run across. And then I start hearing laughing, and I start realizing, hey, wait a minute, man. There ain't even nobody down there. But, you know, that's why I would never, ever, if I had to sleep on that side, you know, because I switched rooms and stuff, you know, throughout the year, but if I ever had to sleep there, man, I'd never look down there. Like, I try to go to sleep quick, too, man. I would never sit up.
Before everybody else.
Yeah, heck, I didn't want to see them. I didn't want to hear them laughing and playing and all that down there. I didn't want to,
Well, that's, you know, when you guys would all go home on the weekends, it was pretty dead down in the bottom there.
Yeah.
So we'd go over to that gym because they always left it open.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd play around in there and go in there and shoot basketball and stuff, but we'd never go down in that basement. And my cousins from down in Seville would come up, and they'd always be like, go down there. Like, no, I ain't gonna go down there. And so we all walked down. We'd like, well, let's do it together. And so there's probably about 4 or 5 of us, and we all snuck down in there into those locker rooms and, you know, spooking each other and whatnot. And all of a sudden we started hearing somebody dribbling a basketball because the floor is right above you.
Yeah.
And we was like, oh shit, we're gonna get in trouble. So we went running up out of there. And we run into the gym, and there's that basketball. It just kind of bounced, like somebody just let it go, and it bounced and rolled away. So right then and there, we whipped out that door. Assholes and elbows is all you could see.
Yeah, we was just talking about that with Daniel on this other podcast right before yours, a couple before yours, but this one anyways. Yeah. But remember that breaker switch was totally across that gym floor?
Yeah.
You had to go, oh man, I used to hate doing that, man. And
it's like got pitch black in there.
Yeah. Well, because, you know, you always worried that someone was just going to run away and shut that front door even. Okay, man.
They always did, though,
too.
I
used to mess with you, so that's why I never liked that. And then we had to go down and clean in that basement. That Sam Juno would make us go down there and clean up, you know, and details and stuff. Oh, man. You're down there, it just feels like someone's staring at you the whole goddamn time. You just, you know, work fast to get the hell out of there. Yeah, I didn't like it down there either in that basement part.
Yeah, I hated that basement part. I hated that whole gym.
That was spooky over there, man. Is it, do they still play in there?
As far as I know, they do.
Hmm.
So that's, you know, I hated, so when I'd go over and hang out with you guys at the, over yonder way there, and I'd have to walk home at night. And so, remember that big field?
Yeah.
That was all pitch black, right up until the street, and then it hit the street light. So I'd be a dead run from the time I went out those front doors of the dorm, all the way across that field to the paved road. I think that's why I got so fast. Just, man, I would haul ass across that. But I was talking to some couple old people, and they was telling me that these demons, they come in a form of you, like the older you when you're younger, like, you know, like my face now. You know what I mean? So when I was a kid, I was probably about, well, let's see, when I lived down there, I was 8, 9. So I was probably about 10, 11 years old. And it was one of the very few times I slept in my bed by myself. And I was laying there and I was sleeping, and something woke me up. But anyways, I had to use the bathroom. So I got up and I went and I walked to the bathroom, which was my sister Jamie's room at the end. So when I come out, my sister Jamie's room was right there, my parents' room right there, and then the bathroom, and then the little furnace right there. So I kind of walked over to the bathroom and I flipped on the light and I used the bathroom, and really had to go really bad. And the whole time I could feel like something was staring at me, you know? And so I finish up and I flush the toilet and I'm washing my hand, and I happened to look up into the mirror, and there was me, and I sat there and I stared at myself for a few minutes. And the longer I stared at myself, it's like I couldn't pull myself away. it's like it just kept my gaze on myself, and I couldn't pull back. I couldn't walk away. I couldn't do nothing. And all of a sudden, my face in the mirror started aging. It started getting older, and I didn't know who it was then, but now I see, when I remember this, it was me in that mirror. It was the older self of me in that mirror staring back at me. And so I'm sitting there staring at myself and start aging, and all of a sudden it starts climbing out of that mirror.
Holy shit.
And I finally get away, and I break away, and I run out the bathroom, and I run to my sister Jamie's room. She was always my safe haven, my protector, older sister. Mm-hmm. And so I run into her bedroom, and I dove on her bed, and I covered up, and I pulled the blankets over my head, and I was laying there, and I remember her waking up, and she's like, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Nothing." She's like, "Oh, you just scared?" I said, "Yeah." And she said, "All right, well, go to sleep." And so I laid there, and maybe about 10, 15 minutes go by, my head was under the blanket. And then, when you can feel somebody crawling up on a bed, and it just kind of pushes down here and there each time they put a hand or a foot down.
Yeah.
I could feel that, and he was straddling me.
Oh, shit.
And he was climbing up nice and slow, and I was just starting to shake. And I didn't know what to do. I couldn't scream. I couldn't yell. I couldn't get up. I couldn't move. And so I just laid there, and then I felt him. His whole body weight was right over top of me. And I could just hear him breathing. And about that time, those blankets ripped off me, and I could see it. And he was dressed in all black, and like a turtleneck, black shirt on, long sleeves, black pants. He was all black, but it was me, the older me. And he started choking me. And I was fighting, and I was swinging, and I was trying to get him off. And the last thing I remember is I just seeing stars. And then I passed out, and then I woke up the next morning, and the blankets were all messed up, and my sister Jamie was up doing her thing, and I got up, and I had bruise marks on my neck. And I was like, holy shit. And so that one really creeped me out, and that kept me from sleeping in my own bed for the longest time.
Man, that's really bad, man. Whatever that is, holy shit. Damn, it's powerful too. Cripes that could do that to you,
Yeah, and that was my biggest thing. And so then when I was talking to these old people, they were telling me about demons and possession and whatnot like that. And that's one of the things they said, is that the demons, when you're a child, they come to you in a form of your older self or something of that nature, or some shit like that.
Cripes, man. That's horrible.
So yeah, that's one of my most vivid ones from down there.
Yeah.
And I really I don't know, I really try and suppress those memories down there because it was always so much. Boarding school was a big part of my life. Mm-hmm. That's where some of the scariest shit I've ever witnessed happened. They had that guy who committed suicide in that house, and we used to walk by that house even after he was gone, and you could just feel stuff just staring at you. And one of my friends moved in there, and he'd be like, "Come over and play." So I'd go over, but I could just feel something, just something wasn't right. So I refused to go in his house. I'd be like, "No, you come over here and play."
Jeez. I told that story to Daniel. He never heard it. It's on that Daniel Wheeler.
Which one?
That story of Dale Douglas. The one that Robert Wildgun told me. I told him that story. Holy cripes.
When they shoved Robert down the stairs?
Oh, no.
I talk him into killing himself, or?
No, just with Robert, not Robert, Dale, when he was, because Robert and that Gillum guy were the ones that walked in, and they got called there to do that check on him.
Yeah.
And they're the ones that found him in there. And anyways, I just told Daniel about that, what I knew about him, that guy dying over there. And, no, but tell me that one. I didn't know Robert was getting pushed down. Yeah, if you don't mind.
So, no, not at all. My dad, so we used to be really close with Robert and them. I mean, well, obviously all the cops and dispatchers. Robert and Cheryl lived in that Dale Douglas house.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, forgive me if I get this wrong, a few details, but I remember most of it. And so, I guess Robert would wake up and he'd have, like, bite marks on him or scratches or, shit like that. Just, and wouldn't know what it was from.
Uh-huh.
And so I guess one day, Cheryl and the kids, I'm not sure if they went to town or what happened, but Robert was home alone. And when Cheryl and him got back, they found Robert, and he was down in the basement. And he had a busted up head and broken ribs and broken arm. And so they got him to the hospital. And when he was telling them what happened, he was telling my dad what happened. And he said that he was sitting there, and he said there were voices, and they were telling him to go to the basement and kill himself. And he was like, I can't do that. And he said he was fighting them and whatever in his head. And he said he walked over to the basement stairs, and he looked down there, and he said somebody shoved him from the back, and he fell down those basement stairs. He said while he was down there, he said something kept trying to drag him. And he said he couldn't really fight because he lost consciousness, and he's hurting pretty bad. And finally they left him alone, and he ended up losing consciousness. And I want to say it was Cheryl. They found him later on down there, like hours later, and got him to the hospital. And after that, they moved out of that house.
Jeez.
But I know there was quite a few other things, and I know Dale Douglas, one of his notes was that the voices are telling him to kill himself, take his life,
Mm-hmm.
shit like that. And that's what one of his notes said is that he can't stop the voices in his head. So he's just, he's just done with life.
Damn.
And that was one of the big things about it.
Uh-huh.
But I remember when we was kids, of course, us being kids, right after he killed himself, we got into that house because it wasn't locked. And I remember I took a pair of fingernail clippers, and my sister kept telling me, don't take those, that's going to follow you home.
Yeah.
I took them anyways, and I carried them around and, cut fishing line with them, shit like that, when fishing on the river. That evening, we went home, and I got in bed, and I was laying there trying to go to sleep, and my fancy new fingernail clippers were sitting on my nightstand next to my bed. It started closing my eyes, and I could hear this tapping on my window, like just a light tap. You really had to be quiet for you to hear it.
Yeah.
And everybody went to bed, so it was really quiet out. And so I laid there, and I kind of thought, should I look? And I was too scared, and so I kind of hunkered down in my bed, and then the tapping got louder and louder, and then it just started banging on my window. And I screamed for my dad, and I jumped up and ran out of my room. And I woke my parents up, and they went and looked, and there was nothing. And so the next day, I took those fingernail clippers and rode my bike by that house, and I threw those fingernail clippers back at that house and took off.
Jeez. No, that when Robert was telling me about when they went in there, that Dale had that basement kind of barriered off. He had the door shut at the bottom or something, nailed shut, and like he said, pill bottles of holy water and smudge, sweet grass was on each step going up. That door going down to it was all barriered off too. He was trying to fight it, man. Whatever it was, he was trying to fight it. And He used to come over and play basketball with us in the evenings. I remember him. Heck, he was nice to all of us kids. He'd show up during the day, too. He'd come in there and, I remember him giving me money for those, those little nibs that they're like licorice, red licorice things. Anyways, it was in that machine, and he would give me money for that. They were 35 cents, and he'd give me that. And, he's really nice to us. I remember him bringing Pop in there a couple times for us.
Yeah, Bob's he's a good guy, and that's what it was. Just, but he always really had that luck.
Yeah. Well, that's too bad. Jeez.
But yeah, and so I know a few other families that lived in there, but I know that they was happy to tear it down after. That shit just kind of sticks around in there. But boarding school, I used to walk down that backside. You remember where that old shooting range was down there?
Yeah.
All the cops would go down there and shoot, and I'd always wander down in that brush, just being a kid all by myself. And I'd have my little Tonka trucks, and I'd go back in the brush and find a little spot, and I'd play and do what little kids do. And I remember it started getting dark out, and I started walking down that gravel road back towards my house. It was probably only about 100, 200 yards. Mm-hmm. And I was really walking, and all of a sudden, how in gravel you could hear more than one person walk. Mm-hmm. And so I heard somebody behind me, and I whipped around really quick, thinking it was, one of you boys from the dorm. And I looked back, and there was nobody behind me, and so I started walking again, and all of a sudden you could hear it again, and I was like, oh, I ain't looking. So I just took off running. I was balls to the wall, and whatever it was right behind me the entire time, just kicking gravel, just making as much noise as I was. And I went smoking through my front yard and ran inside and slammed the door, and my mom's like, what happened? Well, I was telling her something chased me out of that brush down there. She's like, you don't go in those woods by yourself.
Oh. Yeah, I only been down there a couple times. At Tyrone Murphy used to, hey, let's go down there and we'll find some lead. Those cops shoot over there all the time.
Yeah.
We'd pick it at that side of that hill and just look at it, leave it there. Yeah.
Well, that's what we would do too, go pull lead out, just because probably how we all ended up with lead poisoning.
Yeah.
Running down, playing with the lead.
Yeah, I remember there's, Snooze Revis would tell us a lot of stories down there. Right down by, remember where we used to go down to that river?
Yeah.
Kind of right by those swings or that little outside gym there, just right off of that. I remember Snooze, he was the first one I remember telling us ghost stories. He'd build a fire down there, and he'd take that coffee can and make cowboy coffee down there,
Oh, yeah.
Sit there with cups and hang on every word he'd say. Yeah, those are fun nights. I remember those, those matrons down there, they can have a really good impact on your life, They
do.
There's some of them that were kind of mean and whatever, but there's others that just, they think about that stuff today. I remember he taught those Amesback boys, those little ones, at Jess, and what's his brother's name? Anyways, they could never braid their hair or tie it up. Jeez, he taught them how to braid their hair themselves and put those red braid ties on them.
Yeah.
I remember that. He was always teaching them that, because that's how he did his hair, But no, I remember him really taking good care of all of us down there. Yeah, boarding school. My wife's aunt lives down there. I'd like to hear some stories from her, too. It must be the same as in Browning. Every house has a story. Oh, cripes. Everybody got something they can tell, I bet.
Oh, yeah. And that was even at Government Square House. I'd hear somebody walking up and down those stairs. And because we had a basement, and probably to this day, I don't ever want a house that has a basement. And it's just because I'd constantly hear somebody, and they wouldn't just walk up them, they would stomp, made their presence known. That, and then you could always hear somebody chopping wood sounding down there, because we had a fireplace. Well, most of them all had fireplaces in the bottom of them. Mm-hmm. And I'd always hear wood chopping. middle of the night, and I think, what the fuck is my dad doing?
Hmm.
And I'd get up and I'd go look, and my dad would still be in bed. And so I just go lay down. But that shadow figure, that big man that my dad seen walk in my room.
Uh-huh.
He followed me for years,
Oh.
and so my dad seen him then, and then after that, I started seeing him, and I would see him standing on the edge of the tree line down in boarding school, and he just watched me, but you could never see his face. He just looked like a big shadow figure. And if I had to say, he's probably like 6'5". He was a very big man, and he followed me all over down there in boarding school, and then when we moved up to Government Square, I would see him. He'd be standing over by our basement door, by the back door, and it's usually when the lights are out, but you could always make his silhouette out. And that's the thing, is I always thought I was seeing things, but whenever I would see him too much,
Yeah.
And so finally we moved out of that house in Government Square, and I remember it was prom night, and Kelly Fitz was with me, and we were just kind of cruising. After prom, it was our freshman year, and we didn't really party or anything. And so we were just kind of driving around before we went home, and Joe passed the old house on Government Square, and there's that man standing in that window just staring at me.
Oh.
I tell Kelly, I said, look at that. And he's like, what is that? And I said, that guy follows me. And man, I took off out of there. I didn't see him for the longest time after that. And then when we were stationed up in Fort Wainwright, I was laying in my barracks room on that first floor. And I don't know, I just happened to wake up. And I looked, and there he was. He was standing by that front door.
Oh, shit.
And you remember how my barracks room was? That bed was over by the window, and then my entertainment center, wall locker, and then the door.
Mm-hmm.
And I was laying there, and I was just staring at him, and I mean, my heart started racing, and started getting sweaty, nervous, and I jumped up, and I just made a mad dash for my light switch, which he was standing by. When I did it, something hit me in the chest, like really sharp. I didn't know what it was, but I pushed through it, and I kicked that light on, and he went away. And I was shaking, and I was too scared to look at anything else, so I slept with my light on that night. And I finally eventually went back to sleep. And when I woke up for PT later that morning, I went in the bathroom, and I was looking, and I had a pretty decent gash in the center of my chest. And I don't know what it was, but it left a scar. I'm actually looking at the scar right now. It's still scarred on my chest. And I don't know what it was, because there was nothing there to, for me to run into or for me to stab, because it was just wide open. Wide open between me and the light switch.
Right.
But that was, and then when I got home out of the Army, I seen him a few more times, and then I went down and I went and sweat with my Uncle Joe, and I was telling him about it. And he finally, I haven't seen him since.
Damn.
Doctored me up, and I haven't seen him since.
That's good.
And so, I mean, I was relieved, but that thing followed me everywhere I went. I'd seen him from the time I was in boarding school until I got back from the Army.
I think they see something good down your, in your path in life.
Yeah.
And I think they try to stop it, They don't want to, I guess you're, one of these days, probably going to do something really good for a lot of people, you know what I mean? If you already haven't. And so I think, because there's other stories about stuff like that. These holy men. I know a story about one where he was always drunk. And there was always a man that would bring him whiskey to his house, put a bottle on his table. There's nobody there, but that bottle would be there every day trying to keep him drunk.
Really?
Yeah, because he knew he was going to go on and be this, really powerful holy man. Help a lot of people. And, you know, that's, I think, man, when those things follow you like that, well, they must know something. You know, they must know
well,
that.
that's kind of what Johnny Daywriter used to tell me stuff like that. He said, a lot of these spirits, he said, when they start coming to you and they start seeing you, they see something in you and they're looking for help. And that's something, the same thing my Uncle Joe told me. And so he said, when you start seeing these things, he said, start praying for them. He said, start praying for them to go across to the other side, because that's what they're looking for. They're stuck here and they're looking for help to get out of here. And so they're going to the people who have that future or something in them. And so he said, whenever you see those people, he said, just pray for them. Pray that they can cross over.
Yeah.
And so I always have.
Yeah, that makes sense. You know, I've had to do that once too. That thing that kept bothering me down here at that warehouse, I prayed for it. It went away.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really prayed hard one night and smudged for it, and it never showed back up again.
Well, that's the thing. It just, I don't know.
I still remember that that day you showed up. Oh, shit, we just got out of the field, man, in the army. You know, I left the Marines, went to the army there, and just got out of that field and then went back in that day room. And hey, there's a guy here. He says he's from, says he's Blackfeet. Really? And I walked in that day room, seen you there. He's on the phone. He's kind of jumped up. Yes, specialist.
Man.
Don't worry about nothing like that. Shit, what you been doing, Mike?
You know, I was when you walked in there, I was on the phone with my mom.
Oh.
I was crying because I wanted to go home.
Ah, shit, really?
And you showed up, and I was like, I am fucking going home.
What's the odds of that shit, you know? I think about that. What are the odds of that? It's unheard of to have two people from the Jews, let alone Native Americans, two natives from the same tribe, just some luck of whatever, we get put in the same duty station, then we get put in the same company, then in the same platoon. Cripes.
Well, and that's what I always tell everybody too, that you're the one who kept me in the army. If not, I would have begged my mom to take me out.
That was some pretty fun times up there, man. We made a pretty good breach team. I remember that. We got to breach at one time. Shit, I was pretty proud of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was some good times up there, man. It was good.
Yeah, I miss him.
Okay, yep, that was Mikey. So, next week we're gonna have it's kind of up in the air who's gonna be on next week. I got a couple people that are in the shoot, so either way we're gonna have more good stories coming next week as well. That's also when the patron episode comes out, so we'll have 2 shows. If you're a patron, you'll get 2 shows. If you're just here for the good stories that are free, well then there they are right there. There's another one next week, but we'll have some good ones coming next week too. I'll have to be up there for Heartbeat Ending Days too. That's the 2nd weekend of August, and if you can catch me there. We'll get some stories going. We'll maybe record you if you're comfortable, or perhaps if you just want to hear stories, bring your kids over. Geez, I'll tell them a few good ones. All right. Well, thanks again, everybody, patrons, listeners, and everybody for being with us, supporting the show. Really appreciate it. Till next time.